Chapter 6 of Colonel Quaritch, V.C. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Colonel Quaritch, V.C. by H. Rider Haggard. Chapter 6. Lawyer Quest. The day following the conversation described in the last chapter was one of those glorious autumn mornings which sometimes come as a faint compensation for the utter vileness and bitter disappointment of the season, which in this country we dignify by the name of summer. Notwithstanding his vigils and melancholy of the night before, the Squire was up early, and Ida, who had been one thing and another, had not had the best of nights, heard his loud cheery voice shouting about the place for George. Looking out of her bedroom window, she soon perceived that functionary himself, a long, lean, powerful-looking man, with a melancholy face and a twinkle in his little grey eyes, hanging about the front steps. Presently her father emerged in a brilliant but ancient dressing-gown, his white locks waving on the breeze. "Here, George. Where are you, George?" "Here I be, sir." "Ah, yes. Then why don't you say so? Here I have been shouting myself hoarse for you." "Yes, Squire," replied the imperturbable George. "I have been standing here for the last 10 minutes, and I heard you." "You heard me? Then why the dickens didn't you answer?" "Because I didn't think that you wanted me, sir. I saw that you hadn't finished your letter." "Well, then you ought to. You know very well that my chest is weak, and yet I have to go hallooing all over the place after you. Now look here, have you got that fat pony of yours here?" "Yes, Squire, the pony is here, and if it is fat, it isn't for the want of movement." "Very well then, take this letter," and he handed him an epistle sealed with a tremendous seal. "Take this letter to Mr. Quest at Boisingham, and wait for an answer. And look here, see you are about the place at 11 o'clock, for I expect Mr. Quest to see me about the Moat Farm." "Yes, sir." "I suppose you have heard nothing more from Janter, have you?" "No, Squire, nothing. He means to get the place at his own price or chuck it." "And what is his price?" 5 shillings an acre. You see, sir, it's this way. That army gent, Major Boston, as is an agent for all the college lands down the valley, he be a poor weak fool, and when all these tenants come to him and say they must either have the land at 5 shillings an acre or go, he gets scared. He do, and down goes the rent of some of the best meadowland in the country, from 35 shillings to 5. Of course it don't signify to him, not a halfpenny. The college must pay him from his salary all the same, and he don't go no more about farming nor land nor nothing than my old mare Minder. Well, and what comes of it? Of course every tenant on the place hears that those college lands are going for 5 shillings an acre, and they prick up their ears and say they must have their land at the same figure. And it's all owing to that Boston varmint, who ought to be kicked through every hole on the place and then drowned to dead in a dyke. Yes, you're right there, George. That silly man is a public enemy, and ought to be treated as such. But the times are very bad, with corn down to 29, very bad." "I'm not saying that they ain't bad, Squire," said his retainer, his long face lighting up. "They are bad, cruel bad, bad for everybody, and I am not denying that they are bad for the tenants. But if they are bad for the tenants, they are worse for the landlord. It all comes on his shoulders in the long run. If men find that they can get land at 5 shillings an acre that's worth 20, why, it isn't human nature to pay 20, and if they find the landlord must go as they drive him, of course they'll lay on the whip. Why, bless you, sir, when a tenant comes and say that he is very sorry, but he can't pay his rent, in 9 cases out of 10, if you could just look at the man's bank book, you'd find that the bank was paid, the tradesmen were paid, the doctors paid, everybody's paid before he thinks about his rent. Let the landlord suffer because he can help himself, but Lord bless us, if £100 was overdue to the bank, it would have the innards out him in no time, and he knows it. Now as for that varmint Janter, to tell me he can't pay 15 shillings an acre for the Moat Farm is nonsense. I only wish I had the capital to take it at that price." "Well, George," said the Squire, "I think that if it can be managed I shall borrow the money and take the farm on hand. I am not going to let Janter have it at 5 shillings an acre." "Ah, sir, that's the best way. Bad as times are, It will go hard if I can't make the interest and the rent out of it too. Besides, Squire, if you give way about this farm, all the others will come down on you. I'm not saying a word agin your tenants, but where there's money to be made you can't trust no man." "Well, well," said the Squire, "perhaps you are right and perhaps you ain't. Right or wrong, you always talk like Solomon in all his glory. Anyways, be off with that note, and let me have the answer as soon as you get back. Mind you don't go loafing and jawing about down in Boisingham, because I want my answer." "So he means to borrow the money if he can get it," said Ida to herself as she sat, an invisible auditor, doing her hair by the open window. "George can do more with him in 5 minutes than I can do in a week, and I know that he hates Janter. I believe Janter threw up the farm because of his quarrelling with George. Well, I suppose we must take our chance." Meanwhile George had mounted his cart and departed upon the road to Boisingham, urging his fat pony along as though he meant to be there in 20 minutes. But so soon as he was well out of the reach of the Squire's shouts and sight of the castle gates, he deliberately turned up a by-lane and jogged along for a mile or more to a farm where he had a long confabulation with a man about thatching some ricks. Thence he quietly made his way to his own little place, where he proceeded to comfortably get his breakfast, remarking to his wife that he was of the opinion that there was no hurry about the Squire's letter, as lawyers wasn't in the habit of coming to the office at 8 in the morning. Breakfast over, the philosophic George quietly got into his cart, the fat pony having been tied up outside, and leisurely drove into the picturesque old town which lay at the head of the valley. All along the main street he met many acquaintances, and with each he found it necessary to stop and have a talk. Indeed, with two he had a modest half pint. At length, however, his labour o'er, he arrived at Mr. Quest's office, which, as all the Boisingham world knows, is just opposite the church, of which Mr. Quest is one of the churchwardens, and which was but 2 years ago beautifully restored, mainly owing to his efforts and generous contributions. Driving up to the small and quiet-looking doorway of a very unpretentious building, George descended and knocked, whereon a clerk opened the door, and in answer to his inquiries informed him that he believed Mr. Quest had just come over to the office. In another minute he was shown into an inner room of the ordinary country office stamp, and there at the table sat Mr. Quest himself. Mr. Quest was a man of about 40 years of age, rather under than over, with a pale ascetic cast of face, and a quiet and pleasant, though somewhat reserved manner. His features were in no way remarkable, with the exception of his eyes, which seemed to have been set in his head owing to some curious error of nature. For whereas his general tone was dark, his hair in particular being jet black, these eyes were grey and jarred extraordinarily upon their companion features. For the rest, he was a man of some presence, and with the manners of a gentleman. "Well, George," he said, "what is it that brings you to Boisingham?" "A letter from the Squire. Thank you. Take a seat, will you, while I look through it." "Oh, wants me to come and see him at 11 o'clock. I am very sorry, but I can't manage that anyway. Ah, I see, about the Moat Farm. Janter told me he was going to throw it up, and I advised him to do nothing of the sort, but he is a dissatisfied sort of fellow, Janter is, and Major Boston has upset the whole countryside by his very ill-advised action about the college lands. Janter is a varmint, and Major Boston, begging at his pardon for the language, is an ass, sir. Anyway, there it is. Janter has thrown up, and where am I to find a tenant between now and Michaelmas, I don't know. In fact, with the college lands going at 5 shillings an acre, there ain't no chance." "Then what does the Squire propose to do? Take the land in hand?" "Yes, sir, that's it, and that's what he wants to see you about." "More money, I suppose," said Mr. Quest. "Well, yes, sir. You see, there will be covenants to meet, and then the farm is 300 acres, and to stock it proper means £9 an acre, quite on this here heavy land." "Yes, yes, I know. A matter of 4,000, more or less, but where is it to come from? That's the question. Causeys do not like the land any more than other banks do. However, I'll see my principal about it. But, George, I can't possibly get up to the castle at 11. I have got a churchwardens meeting at 1:45, about that west pinnacle, you know.